All right. Hi, everyone. This is a episode of Jono and Dan Chew the Cues with a twist this time because the questions haven't really been prepared. And I went into this trying to think of questions myself because I really value what Mark Kroening here has to say on the subject of regenerative thinking and regenerative agriculture, and also Jono Frew, of course. And so welcome to this conversation. I've got one key question, but I'm picking that this conversation is going to go all sorts of places, and more questions are going to come up during the conversation to be chewed, and afterwards there'll be even more questions. So hopefully it's of value and we're going to get some nourishment out of this. So has either one of you got something to say at this stage before I throw my question out there?
I think probably just acknowledging the background at the moment of our discussion. You know, Mark and I in Canterbury, overnight serious flooding, and the question was raised this morning. You know, do we want to continue with the conversation? And you know, we're all in agreement that yes, no, it almost adds to it. So if people are looking a bit off or a bit maybe on, it could be, we'll leave it up to you to choose. Just know that we have just been dealt with a serious amount of rain. I'm talking close to 250 mils of rain in 48 hours. And it's receding now. The flood, where I am here at the Hines River, the Hines River was literally flowing through behind me just a matter of a few hours ago. So let's take this energy and use it and not hide from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it kind of just really brings the urgency of reality to the front of mind because like I was reflecting this morning on a quote that I really like from Einstein, which is, the only source of knowledge is experience. And what you guys are experiencing now is knowledge in its purest sense. It's a reminder of how powerful nature is and how little we can actually control that, I suppose. So the topic of our conversation was loosely paradigm and what it means and what what a regenerating paradigm would look like, and just building questions out of that. So my question is, how urgent is the need for bold leadership towards regenerating paradigms, and what are the sources of this urgency?
Urgency, such a double-edged sword, because I mean, you know, look out the window, right? Like, it's incredibly urgent, you know, in some respects, but the other side of that, and this is something that I think is kind of in some ways like the paradox that we have to hold, is that if we yield to that urgency too much, it means that we'll do things in ways that maybe aren't so regenerative. So in some ways, we kind of need to hold patience at the same time. That's the first thing that always strikes me when I hear the word urgency.
Yeah, because it kind of provokes a bit of fear, doesn't it? If it's too urgent, it's just right, acting out of fear, what needs to be done, and perhaps that's, like you say, sometimes not the most regenerative way to approach an urgent situation.
Yeah, for sure. There's very little presence in urgency, and it's present leadership that we need, like as in here now leadership. And there's something there as well around trusting that, it's my experience that the right people turn up at the right time. And there's not much comfort in that. And maybe we need to acknowledge that most people are after comfort in terms of the help's coming or the leadership's coming. And what I've got to say is the leadership's here and it's working away, doing what it needs to do. And the more people that step into leadership roles, i.e., whom become present through experience to their purpose, just like what we were talking about, that's the generation of leadership. And I was also hung up a little bit on the term regenerating paradigms, because to me, paradigms can't be regenerated. They are created from nothing. And maybe that's throwing a spanner in the works.
Okay. Yeah, that word paradigms is quite a tricky one to get my head around. And it literally, I looked up the background of the word. The word paradigms comes from to show alongside. So para is like alongside, parallel, and dimes comes from alongside. Oh, sorry, to show. So you're showing things. So you're showing data alongside each other and creating a pattern, because you're getting so many data points through your experience every day that to digest that, you create patterns. And so a paradigm is a set of patterns that you use to, in a way, shortcut knowledge. So you're seeing all these data points hitting you at all stages of the day, and you're filtering out a lot of that and just saying, I know that pattern. I've done it before. I've driven that road. I don't have to take in all of these data points. And so I came up with some other words for paradigm to try and frame it up differently. So worldview, different worldview, different school of thought, discipline, rule book, pattern or example, language, be like a paradigm, and the rule versus the exception. And another word for exception is anomaly. So you've kind of got say a black background, that's the rule, and if there's white spots on it, that the anomaly is the white bits. But to change the paradigm, you could say that it's actually a white thing, a white page with a whole lot of black all over it.
Well, to me is, and one word that I'd love to add to that is space. That's to me a paradigm, is the space from which you operate. Your reality, your it's like the water to the fish. The fish doesn't know it's there, it's always there.
Yeah, and I like using, a lot of people in the regenerative space use the word mindset, and I prefer mindscape, which kind of is similar to space, because it shows that there's a lot more dimensions to it, and it's also not necessarily set. It's just it's a paradigm, I suppose.
That's I thank you, Dan, for saying that, because I've been a big advocate of the work of Carol Dweck on mindset, and you're just striking another paradox here, in that her work is basically saying, hey, there's a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. But then I'm just finding this word set in mindset, and it doesn't really feel right anymore now that you've pointed that out. So if it was mind space or such, that might feel a little bit better. The other word that was coming up for me was context, but I think that's very close to reality. So they're pretty synonymous for me. But in all of this, it feels quite cognitive, feels quite cerebral, and also it's like a human creation, these things that we're talking about. And so I guess the question and response would be, what word would nature use, if at all? Does nature need paradigms or such, or is it sort of more of a binary living or dead, or something like that?
I would say to that, if we are nature, then nature does need paradigm, because we need paradigm to find our way in the world.
In a cognitive sense, that's probably quite true. The question is, how much of our path forward is cognitive, how much of it is, more sense making, heart and gut, and more responding to being rather than thinking about being.
Mind you, there are paradigms that would not allow for being and not allow for, presence, like the paradigm that I inherited, which was work your ass off and everything else will fall into place. And so in that, it's almost like, that, have you guys seen that meme with I've just learned how to say that word properly. I've been saying meme for so long. So I said, what's a meme? Anyway, meme of the guy with the bike with the square wheels, and he's pedaling and it's hard and he's sweating. It's a still shot, the cartoon image. And there's a guy standing behind him with a circle wheel in his hand. And he's like the speech bubble is, want any help? And then the guy who's riding the bike is, no, too busy, can't stop. And the guy standing behind him with the circle wheel, just like, hey. And so the guy on the square bike looking forward with this narrow vision is just like so focused on keeping that thing going. That's his paradigm. He can't stop. There's nothing else that can possibly help him other than, what the sheer hard work. And if he was to stop and open himself up to, a different paradigm, likes of the paradigm of the wheel, all of a sudden everything changes. Like it can be limiting, and it can be, yeah. It's like I love what you said, Mark, mindset. It does so refer to just set. Maybe you're right, Dan. Maybe mindscape.
Yeah, and the mindset, it draws on that link with discipline, and in science there's disciplines, and nature doesn't have disciplines, and it doesn't separate biology from physics, from chemistry, from ecology. But my experience at university was ecology was completely separate from chemistry. And I guess that's like the set part of it. It's set that this discipline, we don't consider all of this other stuff. We only consider the stuff within that.
A bit like the pandemic we're dealing with right now, where the what so is masks and hand wash and social distancing, and that's it. No one's talking nutrition, gene expression, diversifying of the gut biome through contact with soil and other humans.
And if there was some data points to come into the story of, say, from my experience, finding out that nutrition has a huge link with my health, that under the paradigm of, let's say there's a virus and it's threatening all sorts of things, and the only response is social distancing and controlling the spread, then the idea that nutrition can be a useful tool in that is an anomaly. It's not real. That doesn't fit the paradigm so much.
The mass paradigm, the current consensus, or consciousness, if you will. Like, it certainly doesn't ask the question, well, is this something, and I'm not saying, although sometimes this thought does cross my mind, the fact that this virus that we're throwing the kitchen sink at, there's been discussions about how it's less, that the mortality rate is lower than the common flu. And it's like, okay, we're so focused on this thing as like a bad, avoid, control, and war on. We've got this war on COVID, and then someone enters the room. Hey guys, what if we just, get reconnected to nature? Let's just hug 6 people a day, and let it do what it does. That is like not something.
Massive anomaly.
Yeah.
That doesn't fit.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not actually useful data in the fight against COVID. That's an anomaly.
Fight against COVID, that's it, man. It's a paradigm. The fight against COVID.
And it's a good sort of topic, because it talks about urgency. Like, there's so much urgency with COVID, right? And
urgency to get the vaccine. Let's fast track that. Let's push it through.
Yeah, so there is an urgency there, but that urgency is both good and bad, as Mark kind of pointed to. There's a paradox there with urgency, because urgency actually requires change, and it either requires, and what that change isn't set, but urgency, when there's something that is in your face, is an anomaly that's right up against your face, you have to change, and whether it's to go through that or to go around it is kind of, that decision is made based on paradigm, or it's based on your own, what you choose to do. And if you don't go with the mainstream paradigm, then you are the anomaly. But yeah, I'm just pointing to this idea of urgency and the need for change. So sometimes there needs to be an urgent situation, like a really, almost a crisis, for there to be regenerative change, because regenerative, to me, it actually implies something being impermanent. So something ending, so that something new can be born. So,
or is that just the distinction between fixed and fluid? Because the paradigm you're in is fixed, and we have to stop and redirect, as in, what was your terminology? Stop and redirect almost. Whereas if the context is always fluid, it's a continual dynamic.
Yeah,
is up over here.
And that's kind of that is very much my question. I'd love Mark to comment on that. Is it possible to be really fluid, or is it actually a paradigm shift that requires a step change?
I want to offer something to that, but before I do, I kind of need to free this idea out of my head, which is kind of maybe connecting a few of these things together around this question, right? Which is if you go to the doctor and just imagine if the first thing they said was how's your nutrition, how's your sleep, how are your relationships with other people and with nature, and didn't do anything other than work on those things for a period of time. And so like if that was the case, it would clearly be it would be trying to have a different relationship with urgency, probably have a different relationship with control. And I would also argue that it's kind of going back to what it means to be alive. What are the essential conditions for a human to be alive? These are some of the things. And it's, in many ways, it's the absence of those things that are causing not only sort of individual health, but also collective health, and then the ability for viruses and such to spread amongst us, because we're living in ways that are inherently, as an individual and a collective level, unhealthy. And I'm also sort of drawn to acknowledge the fact that and none of us would want to make light of this situation, because obviously there's lots of suffering in lots of different ways at this time. But so back to sort of that sort of question around step change versus fluidity. I think the shorter answer is I don't know, but if we look to nature a little bit, I think it's kind of that, it brings up that idea of bifurcation, which, so things will be steadily ticking along in one direction, and all of a sudden it will accelerate and go in a direction that maybe is surprising, but at quite a large magnitude, quite quickly. So I think from a control perspective, we probably can't control step change. Again, we can probably just cultivate or nurture the conditions such that quite a large change can happen, not so much controlled quickly, but that's what is needed, and that's what can happen at that time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I wonder about the role of leadership, because the way I kind of imagine, and this is all just, and I will say I don't know as well, like I don't know is one of my favorite things to say right now, and it puts me in an uncomfortable space, but it's so empowering, I feel, to say I don't know.
Just if I can interrupt, Dan, what do you experience when you say I don't know? Do you sort of, how do you shift internally when you say that?
I kind of actually feel a dropping, like I'm dropping down. I'm actually right. I haven't, not in a kind of like feeling down, but in a way of like I'm physically dropping the weight of I needed to know, what is it? Trying to search my database of memory of like, do I know this? Do I know the answer? What's my take on this? And just dropping that. So just like letting it down on the ground, and that weight is no longer on my shoulders. I don't know.
And then what does it make available for you?
Well, it absolutely frees up space. It frees up bandwidth for experience and for taking in what other people are saying and really learning.
It's a powerful thing to say.
Sure is.
And we're not brought up that way. We're brought up that you've got to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
We even do tests to find out if you know.
Yeah, but it's interesting when you consider what we're expected to know and what we're expected to trust. Because when you look around, how much of the things that you depend on do you really understand? And how much do you just trust that science has sorted that for you, and you can purchase the parts and the technology that we're using. We're trusting it.
We assign specialists to that cause to inform us of what we need to know in that area, or technology to tell us. We're in this world of informative data, but no one's talking about, and this is so relevant to this discussion, of paradigms and contexts, is, no one's taught us on how to be. We're talking about leadership here that requires a sense of being. Who are you being in regards to the problem that you're facing or the circumstances that surround you? Often it's not a case of what needs to be done, although sure, that does come up when it does, and you know all about it when you do. But what we're discussing here is what's underneath that. What has you think this way? What has this action pulled for? What is your occurring of the situation? And we'll all have different ones.
Yeah. And I'll just briefly touch back on what I was talking about with leadership before I said I don't know. I opened the space and it came back, and that was that leadership is almost like a cushion for an urgent situation that may happen or may be happening. So leadership is kind of like going forward a wee way and creating a cushion for when there's a more widespread urgent situation. There's already a cushion started to build up, so it softens the impact. And so maybe it's like, imagine a step change down. You've reached the edge of something. Well, luckily there was leadership, and a few people went down there and created a cushion so that it wasn't like a massive blow to be forced to change down to something else.
It's a couple of things are coming up for me there. One is sort of a provocation of in some ways is what you're describing, or what I'm sort of hearing is leadership in crisis, and or a piece of what you said was leadership in crisis, and the provocation is that leadership was that management, because I think in that situation you have to control things quite closely to try and get a particular outcome. Whereas in some ways leadership could actually be taking the hands off the wheel. And so something I'd offer here, and this is somewhat of maybe a different take on leadership, which is, leadership is about sort of tending to or nurturing essential conditions and having no control of an outcome, but just a real knowing that if the essential conditions for what you're trying to birth or bring forwards are nurtured, then that's a path to hopefully a group of people achieving something that they're trying to manifest or move towards.
Well, like that is, it's difficult to talk about things in a non-mechanical control way, because that's just how that's how I think, and that's how
I've been indoctrinated.
And so I had a kind of another question come up, which was, what in your lives, what patterns do you follow that are different to the mainstream paradigm? that you find serves a more regenerative pathway forward, like just for your own selves? Any patterns or ideas or parts of a worldview? And I know there are plenty. Is there anything that comes up?
For me, Dan, what comes up there, and it comes back to a piece of the previous discussion around leadership as well, is what I was hearing was, and what was there for me was, is leadership as a distinction is sort of implying that people need lead, and sure, there's a sense of that. But then when I got down underneath that and saw what is leadership, to me, it's authenticity and then bold action. So whatever it is for you that you feel needs doing, or that you're called to do, or that aligns with your, worldview or your paradigm, that you just do it.
It's self-leadership, isn't it?
That's it. And that is sort of the definition of leadership as well, is being responsible for yourself. That's what I've brought to my parenting role. I used to be like a dictatorship, which didn't work. Luckily my son was a bit younger and didn't get to see all that, me trying to mold them into little humans that I think they should be. Ridiculous. Instead, just doing what I know to be important to me and my purpose. And in doing so, all of a sudden, all these other people are draw. It's a bit like that's literally how us three are having this conversation. Is just I started to be authentic, and I started to be out there in the world with my, with what to me was important, and maybe that's all we need. Just people just doing what they think is important, and then using communication to share that in a way that's not like this is the way, but almost to just empower people to do then what to them is important. And if there's little pieces of that can help them on their way, maybe that to me was the what leadership has become for me. And if we did just, and with that comes a sense of and this now flows into the second thing of patterns of Dan's question, is it also rolls now into this thing of, okay, I'm going to do what I know that I need to be doing, and that changes all the time, and the context that I carry with me all the time, and you guys would have heard me say it a million times, is the question that cannot be answered, is how can I help create a world that works aligned with nature. One of the patterns is I accept everyone for exactly how they are and exactly how they're not. And I listen from a place of, this person, no doubt, without any scratch of doubt, knows things that I don't. And then that allows for not the masses moving in the same direction. Like I sort of put it back to, that picture of being on a train and it's heading for a cliff and people are arguing which side of the train to sit on. That this whole thing of accepting means that everyone can do whatever they need to do that's important to them. And it might contribute to lots of other people. That's the importance of the communication side of things. But more importantly, it keeps them on track, doing something that we may not even know that needs to be done. If that makes any sense at all. These conversations bring out these expressions that we've not thought about. That's the beauty of it. And we just say it and we think, does that make any sense?
Yeah, and absolutely. It's like self-leadership, self-authenticity, and also self-trust. Like, we're just talking without doing what we were taught, which was, oh, don't say anything without thinking. You got to think about it and make sure it's okay before, because you can't trust yourself. You might say something completely ridiculous.
Do you
That's
know
not
that's
right.
even the thing that we get told is like, think before you speak?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous when you think about it.
Such a great example of another problematic indoctrination. There's just a litany of it, but almost trying to tie back what you just said, Jono. And before I do so, like, I mean, thank you for your leadership and being authentic, because I've certainly taken a lot from that. And you're one of a number of people from very different places that are encouraging authenticity and vulnerability and doing what you think needs to be done with as little judgment as possible, and believing that the feedback will come and that will be able to allow us, if we're sort of self-compassionate and our context is compassionate, it'll allow us to sort of modify and try again or so forth, but certainly contribute our unique perspectives. But in another way to answer your question, Dan, like this sort of, the thing I want to say is I have this tension, and one is this tension between sort of regeneration, which in some ways is about allowing new things to grow, or maybe for increased health in a place to grow, which in a really extreme version of it, it would say, hey, let's just, put all of this bad stuff that we have to one side. Let's grow something better. And over time, perhaps that could crowd it out. And that's certainly been something I've thought about for a period of time. A second, maybe opposite sort of side to that is saying, actually, no, what we do have in front of us does need to be different. It has sort of foundational sort of root issues at its heart, and they need attention, so that a whole bunch of stuff, kind of like a house of cards, right? Like if we work on the real root of something and improve that, then that can kind of potentially have the bad stuff collapse and maybe the good stuff sort of generate out from it. So there's a long way of saying, like, the thing that I'm most drawn to that is something that's not conventionally done is working on root issues, actually getting to the real heart of things, which requires real understanding. And even within that, like, just as I say that, it implies that the things that you really try and understand have to be quite contextually relevant to you, because to really understand something requires so much time and energy and investment to do so. But yeah, to try and in some ways encourage others to be doing more of this, so that we all in our places understand our context more, and then give attention to the things that may need to be different to be life-giving in the future, and have more of that work being done. And in contrast to sort of what I see a lot of in the world, which is a much more surface level amount of work, which makes us feel good because we can imagine it shows results, but because nothing inherent or really deep is changing, we're just sort of in some ways kicking the can down the road, and nothing's actually different. And at the same time, as individuals, we're not changing that deeply either. And with those two things being true, I would sort of somewhat antagonistically say nothing's actually changing, and so we shouldn't expect different results.
Yeah.
It's like embracing not understanding, because if we understand, surely it's been done.
Yeah, just need to Google it and find out.
And what you're saying there is maybe we don't need to fully understand before we, embark.
Yes. We don't need to understand. If we wait until we understand, it's way too late. Actually, we don't understand so much of what we do. And if we were to try and understand it all, it just would, it all changes as well. And I guess that's part of my different way of seeing the world is I see that things are in constant flux, in constant change. So if you were to try and understand how it is now, it would be obsolete because it's changed, moved on.
But what's really key in that, Dan, is that as you try and understand, while you give attention to something, you as an individual are changing. And that is the kind of the actual, that's the more important thing, is that change that happens on the individual. So I think this sort of is an idea that was introduced at the beginning of the conversation. But sort of in the coaching that I do, the idea generally is coaching is an action learning process, and you can't learn without action, which is kind of bringing in that idea of experience. So, you know, in many ways, it doesn't actually matter so much what the vehicle is that we're on, the train or whatever it might be, but if we're into it, we're committed and we're taking action, we will learn from taking that action what we need to learn to be able to then be different ourselves, and to then sort of be able to respond in a different way in the future, which is all part of, you know, if we're all doing that, then we would be all growing and learning together in our contexts, and it would all add up to quite a lot of change over time.
What you just said there, learn through taking action, to me, it just, that's so painstakingly clear and obvious that we learn through being. We learn through doing, through taking action. We don't learn through overthinking and trying to read books about everything like that. That can help build the context perhaps and help sort of solidify the paradigm, but it doesn't create knowledge.
And
Well, it's sort of knowledge, but it's in here.
Yeah,
And it doesn't,
it's not reality.
It doesn't work in there. Yeah. But,
and
wow.
all action is like created equal, like, because in the world, you look at the world, capitalist world, there's so much action happening, but it's action kind of, as we were saying earlier, it's action like this, really closed action, which isn't open to feedback and to learning. So that type of action doesn't generate learning and knowledge.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like strong assertion for me, let's be a little bit in some ways nuanced about action, in that some action is more constructive or even the approach to the action is important to be able to learn from it.
It's like yeah, or like or what's the word, dynamic action, like, you know, constantly changing, represent what needs to be done, act, you know,
as in not a machine. So we can't actually have factories and, you know, like production lines and mechanical X, Y, or Z, because those things can't learn.
And we've developed strategies as humans almost robotic. You know how you meet some people, and I was one of these people for a long time, is like, this is how you got to do. This is what you got to do. This is how you do it. And this is, don't do anything else. Just right now, do this. And it's like, wow. You know, this is the world.
That, you'll get no in response. You'll have control. If you do it your way, you'll know what the outcome is.
Oh, you'll get the medal.
Yeah.
You'll get the medal. You'll get the stamp. You'll get the certificate. And then you can go around telling everyone else that you've made it. Meanwhile, everything's collapsing and you don't know why. Your relationships are falling apart. You don't know where you're at because you don't have something to chase anymore, because apparently you've just achieved it. It's like, and I've diverted there. Let's just come back to the conversation. But what?
Yeah. Sorry.
I know I'm now like changing my focus from the distinction leadership to the distinction something like dynamic action or present action, like dealing with what is so right now, minus any attachments to a certain way of doing or being, and then just doing what needs done,
Responding to your actual experience.
but not reacting.
Mm.
You know, like I make the point of not reacting because it's not something it's not like what am I trying to say here?
It's not a repeat of something else. It's a new action. It's not a reaction. It's
Yes.
an action.
Yep. Yes. And it may give you a brand new outcome that may stop you taking action at the first place because it's scary, you know, something brand new.
Yeah. And Mark, you were talking about feedback and being open to that feedback. Well, there might be a better word than feedback, but just being open to the experience that you're having and not just basing your actions on a set of rules that you were taught, but you're actually taking it in. And that reminds me of my inquiry into economics and how economics is treated as a source of knowledge. Like it's treated as a science. And science itself is such a great philosophy, which it is a philosophy. It is that through experimenting, we can discover about the world. And we are to be skeptical of what people say or what is sort of like knowledge. Anything that's labeled knowledge, science says be skeptical of that and do an experiment. And in the science world, you do your experiments and they are peer reviewed, and the idea is it's done with so much skepticism that you really uncover some really great insight. And we've seen this, like science has made amazing things possible. And then you look at economics and how the science of economics, or to me, it's treated as if it's a science with that skepticism, but it's not actually open to feedback. It has constructed laws that are true because they are made to be true.
Mm.
And then there's feedback. There's so many anomalies that are like, this is not how the world works, but it's blind to that and it does not adapt to that. Can you comment on that, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in that. Obviously, I mean, to perhaps give a pithy response, it would be that I don't think we understand economics at scale at all, because no, it's beyond our comprehension. And yeah, I agree wholeheartedly that once you make a rule, you know, it's more likely to become true. But at the end of the day, if we actually looked at economics with our eyes open, we would see that there's all of this activity happening. And at the same time, there's all of this damage happening to the environment. There's all this damage happening to people, you know, socially and culturally. And it's got some really big problems. And there's likely a way to, you know, one, achieve a different purpose. So at the moment, economics is basically around, you know, I don't even like to say it, but the cliche of growth. For what purpose? I don't know that anyone really knows. But, you know, if the purpose was about well-being and well-being of people and well-being of the environment, which is, you know, essential for us to be well as humans and all other living and non-living things. I think that what we would be doing economically would be looking very, very different. And so, yeah, big invitation for us all to, yeah, think about how we can move with respect to that, because it's a big system that no one person's going to control, but we can over time potentially interact with the economy in different ways, and different outcomes are possible if we do. But it's like, I mean, it's funny, right? Like I'm speaking away here going, oh man, this is really boring. This like thread of economics, because like it's so big and so hard to actually wrap your heads around that. That's kind of the problem, is that it's too big and our focus is too broad. And to me, that kind of reminds us to be much more locally focused, geographically focused with all of these things, to make it more contextual, so that we can understand it better and actually participate in it in ways that we have feedback and we have relationships, and we can share love and all of these other aspects that dry and boring economics doesn't have much in.
Hey, I just drew a card, one of Vanessa Jane Smith's cards. Check it out.
Kidfulness.
Remaining curious.
Yeah.
It's saying to me, stop being such adults about this stuff.
Yeah.
Like a kid's understanding of economics is probably the right level.
Yeah.
Like my daughter, Dad, can we get this? No, you don't have enough money. Can't we just get more money?
Yeah, perfect. That's true.
Yeah, and is it working? We have this thing that isn't questioned. It's the law. It's the law of economics. We make it very important, and globally, and maybe that's it, Mark. Maybe it's only because we think so globally, and it is so massive. If we were just to think local, how different would that be? Because there was a time where that's all we had.
Yeah, so in some ways, not that we can potentially have that counterfactual, because it's quite some time ago now. It's not our generation, and maybe our grandparents' generation or before that, was a much more local sort of situation.
Like my grandmother, she was brought up in a world where you grew your own, kumara. It was a big local patch. There was a few cows. The kids didn't have school. They didn't have shoes to go to school, but they always had food. They'd have bacon all year round because it kept really well. But my grandmother is resourceful. She can make anything out of nothing. She, skilled at living essentially. She make flax, different pieces of for bowls and nets and even aesthetic things. And my grandmother still doesn't understand money. Like my grandfather died last year, and she's never had an FPOS card. She's only ever had like cash in a little bowl thing up in the cupboard that everyone knows about. That's just my grandma's money, And it just doesn't occur to her as something that's important. Although now she feels responsible. She's overwhelmed by this thing called money. And they've got this house that they've been in for nearly 50 years, and like she just doesn't understand. She's caught up in the importance of it all, like the stress of, oh my God, I've now got to make things work every month, every week. I've got to pay this. I don't know how to do that. My mum helps her with her internet banking. She's learning, but she's gone from not having it as a point of focus to all of a sudden she's got no choice, and she realizes that actually the world values this thing we call money in economics, and in fact if you don't have it and you're not smart with it, I don't know, what's the thought? Do we think that we're going to die without it?
Actually, a lot of the time, if you don't have money, you don't have relationships. Maybe not to the point of like personal relationships, but relationships of trade, of your source of food, of the things that you need for your household. You won't have those trading relationships if you do not have money.
Yeah, well, because the currency in her day was the food. And I tell you what, she's got more than enough food. In that sense, she is wealthy.
Yeah.
And in this economic system that we live in now, it's so sad that it's not valued to have those skills that your grandmother has.
Yeah, not valued at all.
It's not valued, and actually it's not rational in the economic mindset. I'll call that a mindset of don't grow your own food. It's cheaper to buy it where it's mass produced, and don't make your own things because it's cheaper to buy it at the shop where it's like cheap as and
Or more
someone making it from.
convenient.
Yeah, and
We even have the store that's called the convenience store.
And it doesn't ask at that same time, like why is it cheaper? And maybe a similar question, like what are we losing if we don't grow it ourselves? So like I really like what you said, Jono, that like your grandmother is resourceful. Like how many people would you describe, you know, if you kind of walk down the street at a mall or, you know, something, if you looked at these people and no value judgment, but just in a really objective sense, like, is this person resourceful or not? And it's not going to be very many people. And that's not their fault. You know, they're a product of all of these systems and so forth that they're a part of. But it, you know, to kind of, you know, beat, you know, sound my own trumpet or beat my own drum here, like it kind of, again, it tells us in some ways what our work is to do, which is to try and nurture the essential conditions that are in our context, such that things like resourcefulness, for example, are cultivated and enabled in people. And then when that is true, we don't have to think about money anymore. Sweet.
It's also like an acceptance thing as well, Mark. Like we don't, you know, on a societal level, we actually, when you get really honest here, we don't accept these people, these resourceful people. We don't, we think they're weird. You know, like you go to my grandmother, she's hanging out Glad wrap on the line to reuse. She's you know, got every single plastic bag she's ever bought wrapped up and folded in a tight little triangle that she keeps in a bag, you know, and then she'll use every one of them multiple times. And we think that's weird. My grandma doesn't understand that concept. That's just how things are. That's just normal to her.
What your grandmother's doing is she's operating in ways that other individuals or companies can't extract money from her.
Yeah, so it's actually negative for the economy to behave like that.
Negative for financial economy and the simplifying a few steps, like the aggregation of financial wealth in a small number of places, large amounts of it in small places.
It's like getting back to that local thing again, though, isn't it? Like there's a part of me that whenever I talk about local food production and people getting, you know, present to the opportunity that they have to grow their own food, there's almost like a sense of, don't go there, Jono, don't do it. You know, there's too much riding on this context of simplification and centralizing of our food system. And going back to Mark, what you said about, you know, food being cheap, and look where that's got us, focusing on it as an economic transaction, which it is just not. Like, this is a real point I want to bring to the surface here is, you know, we've slipped into this commodity-based food production model that relies on production of cheap food over real wellness, like what you said, Mark, the shift from economic value to actual just well-being as a point of interest. When we take away the value of food, because it is the most valuable thing apart from just water and air
and sun.
I was about to say, which we can't monetize, but we already have.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing it. It's you can sort of see that all the problems we're facing around health and well-being, physically and mentally, is a result of that paradigm of food production, of let's make food a commodity that must be cheap, and the farmers don't win and the people don't win. Who wins?
Do you have an answer to that question? Because I think there are people that are winning.
We'll follow the money.
Yeah, and maybe just
are they actually winning?
that was where I was going to go.
Well, that's it, Dan. Are they what? They got lots of money, but are they restful? Are they peaceful?
Are they well?
Are they well?
The research is becoming more and more clear that they're not. Like so many people with lots and lots of money have very few friends.
Yeah.
They have very little capacity for things that they can't get without using money. And so, yeah, they're out of relationship with family, friends, their place.
Drugs is, as a result of the lack of fulfillment.
Suicide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy moly. But we put so much value on that.
That's winning.
Yeah, that's our definition of success. I say it all the time. I know lots of very wealthy poor people. Going to Thailand was an eye-opener. In Thailand, if you don't make it, like there's no backup. There's no government waiting with the, benefit over there. People learn to make things work. And I fall into it too, like this thing where, like I'll have a tough month, like since the crash, or things that with workflow and that being, and my actual ability has made it mean has equaled a lower income amount, so I'm just making less money, and every now and then I'll fall into like I'll slip into that paradigm of money as the measure of success, and I'll feel really worthless. And like there was a point recently where I actually basically emptied my 2 children's savings accounts, and that to me was like a low point. And in that moment, I'm not aware of the difference I'm making on a community level, and the measurement of wealth as being anything other than monetary. Whereas if I was to shift to, for instance, my actual health, which given my recent, injuries is incredible, really, like incredible. I'm sitting here breathing and walking and I can feel all of my toes and my feet. Like that's incredible. But in these moments of like 2 weeks ago when I'd emptied my kids' bank accounts, I've topped it back up now, by the way. I'm back up to where, so they don't need to know. Kids, if you're watching this, Daddy's got it sorted. But no, in that moment, man, I don't see the value in my actions, which now when I'm present to the impact of my actions, like yesterday, checking on the neighbors. One of the neighbors hadn't been contacted by any of his employers. He was a young Filipino gentleman sitting in a house surrounded by water, and no one's communicating with him. We got to go there and say, look, man, this is our number. We're over here. We're your neighbor. And he was like, so relieved that we were there just to, I could see he didn't want us to leave. I said, "You're welcome to come around home," but he was quite happy. If we were to value our actions and our conversations and who we are as people, because in that moment of feeling like I'm not worthy because I'm not making enough money or whatever, whatever society says is not successful, if I'm in that and I'm buying that as a paradigm, I'm paralyzed. I'm not ready to take action. I'm resigned to this failure that I have created because of the common consensus of success as a monetary thing.
Yeah, your self-worth is dropped.
100%.
Accept that.
Yeah, and in that, I don't take action. If I'm disempowered and resigned, the last thing I want to do is get out there on those skinny branches, that's when I'm out there, like right now, when I'm actually really present to the difference that I'm just focusing on myself here, because that's really all I can talk about with integrity is the difference that I actually do make is, as long as I'm present to it, that's the key. Then I feel massively empowered. Like it's like step, whatever there is to do. I need to do that. I'll do that. And not thinking about the money as a focus or a thing to obtain. If I get really honest there, that's when the money comes. When I'm not even focusing on it. When I'm out there on the skinny branches doing, like I said, what I know is authentic for me to do.
Wow. Yeah, man.
I'm just
So
having
much you've said.
moments too, man. Yeah.
So much you've said is just so powerful. And I am very present to the fact that we need to wrap up. And but I just wanted to just draw attention to what you said, what we've kind of talked about. And we've kind of talked about your grandmother, Jono, having a different paradigm. And we've kind of celebrated the resourcefulness of your grandmother and that way of being in the world, being resourceful, being able to make and grow real valuable things that contribute to real wealth. And we've also celebrated how children see the world, and the card that I pulled was kidfulness, and talked about how kids are playful and they understand what they want, but they don't understand the money side of things. It just doesn't register. And perhaps if we were more in tune with experience like kids are and just playing, then so much more possibility is created. So yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Dan. And the question I'm left with is a rhetorical question for everyone almost is, what are you participating in? What am I participating in? And I think it's gonna sit with me. So as I say that, thanks to you both for holding this space. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this. Let's end our chats now with questions. I'm gonna throw one out there too, like an invitation for you to ask yourself is what are you holding as a measure of success? What are you attached to as what is your carrot? That if you got, that would be it. And for me, I know there is none. There's no such thing as that. Unless you can give me the carrot of a world working along with nature. And there's freedom in that as well. But yeah, what is your, as I've mentioned before, the distinction of my focus on success as monetary and or focus on success as who I am in the world? Yeah, what is your measurement?
All right. Okay. Well, thanks, guys, again. And let's wrap up and we'll do another one of these soon. Have a great day.
Okay.